Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm Brad Bannon. My guest in this half hour is Cedric Leighton, Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, CNN military analyst, and the CEO of Cedric Leighton Associates. We're going to cover a bunch of foreign policy and national security topics in this half hour. Sometimes when I have guests on, I think, what am I going to do to get through a half an hour with topics? But that's never a problem with Cedric Leighton. I always wonder how I'm going to compress everything I want to talk about in a half hour. But anyway, we're going to start with this video, which is Republican Congressman Don Bacon talking about the airstrike in the Caribbean that apparently required two airstrikes.
The Venezuelan alleged drug boat that was struck one time, but then a second time as two survivors were clinging to the wreckage of the boat. Your committee, you're on the Armed Services Committee, is going to be investigating this, according to your chairman. How concerned are you that this may have been a real violation of the way, even if it's a question of whether or not we're at war, but that this would violate the laws of warfare?
Well, it is a big concern. Now, Secretary of Defense Hegseth denies it. We should get to the truth. I don't think he would be foolish enough to make this decision to say, kill everybody, kill the survivors, because that's a clear violation of the law of war. So I'm very suspicious that he would have done something like that, because it would go against common sense. So let's get the facts. And if the facts go to where the Washington Post article takes it, well, then we'll have to go from there. But if it was as if the article said, that is a violation of the law of war. When people want to surrender, you don't kill them. And they have to pose an imminent threat. It's hard to believe that two people on a raft trying to survive would pose an imminent threat. So let's get the facts first. The Secretary Hegseth deserves his day to present his side of the story.
That was Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska talking about the recent airstrike against boats in the Caribbean. Our guest in this half hour is a good friend and one we have a lot because he brings some clarity to the muddled situation of international and foreign policy and national security. Is Cedric Leighton, CNN's military analyst and a retired colonel of U.S. Air Force intelligence. Colonel Leighton, welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Brad, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back with you.
Your reaction to that video, I believe I saw just before we went on the air that the White House press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, acknowledged there was a second strike on that fishing boat that killed the survivors. What's your reaction to this whole mess? You know, there's a movie now out about the Nuremberg trials. Mm-hmm. And didn't we try Nazi and Japanese war criminals after World War II for doing things like this?
We absolutely did, Brad. And the Nuremberg movie is actually highly recommended. I went to see it with my son a couple of weekends ago, and it is outstanding. But it also has a message, and that message is that defense of actions such as I was just following orders is something that is not acceptable. So if anybody comes up with the defense that they were just following orders, that does not fly in the international justice system, and it certainly won't fly in U.S. courts or in cases where there's an international tribunal, even though the United States doesn't recognize those. But yeah, this particular action is extremely disturbing. And listening to Congressman Bacon talk about it, he was basically spot on with everything that he said. He's also, by the way, a retired Air Force Brigadier General, so he has experience with military matters and has experience with military law because he served as a commander several times, and he also had to deal with some issues like that, but nothing to this extent, nothing to that was so extreme. So in this particular case, we have a situation where there were apparent survivors from the first boat strike. This all happened on the 2nd of September. The laws of armed conflict, the laws of warfare, maritime law, all require you to render aid to someone who is in uh, the sea. Like, let's say they're the result of a shipwreck. They are basically floating on a raft, or they're floating on some debris. The job of every maritime entity is to go and pick them up and render aid to them. That is a duty that international law recognizes, and failure to do that results in not only penalties, but can also severely undermine U.S. policies going forward. So it's this is a very serious issue, and it absolutely requires an investigation at the highest levels.
Well, let me ask you this question. And, you were an Air Force officer for what, 25 years?
26.
Uh, what if you were involved in a situation like this and the secretary, report to the Secretary of State that there are a couple of survivors left from the air attack, and you go back and kill them? How would you react to that?
Well, you have to disobey that order. If the secretary or a subordinate official, an official subordinate to the secretary, ordered you to do something like that, it is absolutely on its face an illegal order. Now, if you don't know that there are survivors at that moment in time, that might be a mitigating circumstance. But generally speaking, if you have clarity as to what's going on, and if you know that there are survivors, you absolutely cannot go and kill them. That is just the very clear, uh, clearly stated in the law. It's a very rigid requirement.
Do you think an event like this has a detrimental effect on military morale?
Absolutely. One of the key issues is, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, all of them expect their superior officers to have their interests at heart and to not get them in trouble. So if you're in a senior leadership position, the last thing you want to do is put your own people at risk, whether it's in combat, from enemy fire, or in in a legal situation where they might potentially be charged with a war crime. Those are the kinds of things that you absolutely studiously avoid, and that's the kind of situation that we're in at this particular point in time. It looks as if the people who are subordinate to the admiral at the Joint Special Operations Command and U.S. SOCOM, that those people either followed orders blindly, or they did not know what was going on in terms of there being survivors or not, or they just executed the mission without thinking about these consequences. And that, of course, is a significant problem if that's the case.
There's speculation in DC, for what it's worth, that the Trump administration, the president, is thinking of removing Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. What's your guess? Do you think he'll stick with them, or do you think now that we have congressional committees investigating this situation, they'll use it as an excuse to dump him?
It might very well be an excuse to dump him. It depends on a variety of things. He kind of expressed support for Secretary Hegseth on the flight up from Florida last night, but he also said, I would not have done that when he was asked specifically about the double tap, the second portion of the double tap. And so that was an interesting tell, I thought. I thought that was something where it's pretty clear that President Trump thinks that this might be a bridge too far, although he isn't obviously not saying that publicly at this point.
Our guest in this half hour is Colonel Cedric Leighton, CNN military analyst. Uh, what do you think will come out of these congressional investigations? They can investigate all they want, but do you think it will result any change to orders to military personnel involved in these attacks in the Caribbean and Pacific, or is this just going to go away like many congressional investigations do?
This one feels a little bit different, Brad. I think that it might very well lead to some movement in terms of the types of rules of engagement. And it might also limit some of the actions that are going on in and around Venezuela at the moment. But we'll see. There's basically a race against time. There's a meeting coming up in a little over an hour where the president is going to be meeting with senior staff members, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of State, and others. And that meeting should determine what's going to happen in Venezuela itself from an operational perspective. As far as the congressional investigations are concerned, it's going to be something that's going to be a critical thing for them to do if they want to protect.
Colonel Leighton, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we've got to take our quick radio break here. We'll be right back with more Deadline DC after this very quick break. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest this half hour, and one of our favorite guests, is Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, and a military analyst, or the military analyst for CNN. Let's turn to let's continue this discussion about unlawful orders. There's been a big controversy in Washington in the last week or so. A group of members, Democratic members of Congress with military backgrounds, made a video saying that members of the armed services have an obligation to disobey lawful orders, presumably like the one that Secretary Hegseth just gave to attack the survivors of that attack off the Venezuelan coast. The president retaliated by calling them traitors for encouraging the military to disobey the orders of the commander-in-chief. As a former military man, what's your take on this?
So I think what the six members of Congress did was actually quite interesting, because what they ended up doing was in essence saying, don't just follow orders blindly. Follow your conscience and follow the law. I almost wonder if they actually had an idea that this was happening and just couldn't say it because of the classified nature of this issue, and that might be something that would be part of the drill, I think, when it comes to something of this type. But I think that video was spot on, and I think it was absolutely necessary for the members of Congress to do this.
Okay. Now, my next question about this is, I gather the Pentagon is now investigating Senator, former Captain Kelly, about his statements about unlawful orders. It seems to me, just from a political standpoint, it would be crazy for the Trump administration to pursue Senator Kelly. But what do you think's going to come of this Pentagon invasion, investigation? From what do you think from a military point of view? I've already said what I think of it from a political point of view.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, what you're dealing with is something that probably won't go very far, because former retired Navy Captain Kelly, now Senator Kelly, was absolutely within his rights to do what he and the other members of Congress did. All they did in that video was simply say, "Follow the law." That is it, plain and simple. Follow the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that is really what you're looking at here. That is, in essence, the key element. And if you if you don't do that, in other words, if you're following orders blindly,
I'm going to have to interrupt you again rudely. We've got to bring back our radio listen. No, yes, we do need to bring back our radio listeners. We'll be right back with more of Deadline DC after this break. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm Brad Bannon, and our guest in this half hour is CNN military analyst Cedric Leighton. Okay, since you've been coming on the show, we've been talking about Ukraine. And it would be very helpful to our viewers and listeners if you could help clarify the situation. A few weeks ago, the president offered a 28-point peace plan between Russia and Ukraine. And my favorite cartoon is an aide rushing into the Oval Office. We just got this peace plan. Should we send it to Kiev? And the president says yes immediately. And the aide asks, should we translate it from the original Russian first? Where are we on the Ukraine? It's very confusing. Then the president announced there was a peace plan that everybody had agreed to, except for a few details, that was going to be accepted by the Ukraine by Thanksgiving. Well, it's past Thanksgiving. Are we close to peace in Ukraine?
Yeah, Brett, I'm afraid not. And you're pointing out some huge issues here with this whole so-called peace process. And I think everyone who's been dealing with Ukraine really wants there to be peace there. But you can't have peace at any price. That is one of the big problems. And the way that original peace proposal or so-called peace proposal was basically publicized really showed that what Russia had done was basically they'd co-opted Steve Witkoff, the president's emissary, and they were able to in essence, regurgitate Russian talking points. I mean, no American in their right mind would put something in there about that the Russian language should be an official language of Ukraine. That was one of the elements of the original 28-point peace plan. Other things, of course, include that Ukraine must vacate territories that Russia hadn't even conquered yet, especially in the eastern regions of the Donbass. So every single element of that plan would basically hand Russia a victory without them having achieved it through military means. What they worked on in Florida and in other places over the weekend was a plan between the US and Ukraine with Europe in the background. And what that plan supposedly is going to do is present more of the Ukrainian standpoint. Now, what's going to happen here is Witkoff is going to go, the president's emissary is going to go to Moscow. He seems to be enamored with Putin quite a bit, so it's going to be interesting to see the dynamic. But what he should be doing is presenting a unified front between, U.S., Ukraine, and Europe on one side, and confronting the Russians with some very specific proposals and ultimatums, basically, that need to be given. My suspicion is that they won't do that. Ultimatums would basically be the only one that that would be the way to work with the Russians. But failing ultimatums, failing a forceful message that tells the Russians that they need to get out of Ukraine or at least stop where they are, that we're not going to see any peace until something like that happens, and the Russians feel that they cannot win militarily or diplomatically.
Now, there was a story last week that the Army Secretary, whose name escapes me, went to Kiev to talk to President Zelensky and said basically you're in danger of being overrun. So it's very much an advantage for Ukraine to accept peace terms from Russia before they take over the entire place, lock, stock, and barrel. Is that your assessment of the military situation there?
So really, the military situation is a bit more complex than that. The Ukrainians do have some pressure points that they're dealing with, particularly in the area around the town of Pokrovsk, which is in the Donbas region, and also in the Zaporizhia area, and that gets toward the area where that nuclear power plant is. So one of the key elements here is that the Ukrainians have always had a shortage of personnel and a shortage of weapons. What needs to happen is they need to stabilize the situation on the front, and they also have to be in a place where they can get as many offensive weapons as possible in there to really uh, basically stall the Russian advances. And if that isn't done, then we're going to see a prolonged war, and that's going to be a real problem.
The president, in his inimitable manner, tried to make a point about Russian power, I believe, last week when he said basically said publicly that Zelensky can either accept this peace agreement or, as the president put it, fight his little heart out. My first reaction is a lot of Americans admire the heart and fight uh, behind the Ukrainian effort to uh, roll back a Russian occupation.
Mhm.
Uh, what is it going to take? I mean, how much does does Zelensky have to give up land that the Russians currently don't occupy to get a peace agreement? Is that what's going on here?
That's what certainly the Russians want, and it seems like Trump might want, or at least his administration might want. But yeah, I think Zelensky can avoid that as long as the Europeans stay on his side, and people like Secretary Rubio stop that kind of a movement. Because the real way to do this would be to basically freeze everything the way it's in place, create a situation kind of like Korea where you have a demilitarized zone, and while it's not officially recognized, the lines of conflict are basically the borders, and that would, in essence, protect Ukraine as it exists right now from further Russian incursion, as long as there's a way in which the Ukrainians can be assured of support from the West, especially from Europe, and also, of course, from the United States.
Okay, I read a story last week that Germany, concerned about Russian expansion, is making major efforts to gear up their military forces. How do our former European allies like Germany and France think of these negotiations, who apparently they've been excluded from?
Yeah, they're very concerned about this. This is not something that they want to see. They believe that what the U.S. is doing is basically selling out Ukraine. That's what you hear privately from a lot of German lawmakers, and it's doing significant damage to our transatlantic relations. That's something that really has to be repaired by the next administration.
Do you think, Colonel, that Americans would accept the United States abandoning Ukraine? After they've put up a brave fight,
Yeah.
and do you think Americans would accept it from a political standpoint if Trump just completely abandoned Ukraine and left them to the devices of the Russians?
No, I think the question would be who lost Ukraine. It would be just like what was done in the late 1940s when China became communist. Who lost China was the big political question. It almost cost Truman, a majority in Congress. And in fact, I guess he did lose it in that election that came afterwards. So there would be significant political repercussions. And I think it would be even more severe than what Truman faced back in 1948-49.
Okay. So you think basically we're in for a continuation of the hostilities there?
Yes, I think, unfortunately, I think until we convince the Russians that they cannot move forward in any reasonable way in the near term, we're going to see hostilities continue, and it's going to be tough on the Ukrainians.
Colonel Leighton, thanks for joining us again today on Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm sure we're going to want to have you back because, national security policy is a big issue these days. I want to thank Colonel Leighton. I also want to thank our first guest, Mavinti Quashie, the national political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and of course our intrepid executive producer, Mark Rinaldi, who covers up all my mistakes, just like the White House covers up the president's, I guess. Although I'd like to think my mistakes aren't as bad. Next week, our guest will be Kate Lincoln Goldfinch, who is an immigration lawyer. She'll talk about the Trump war against immigrants and also maybe a little Texas politics. So miss the very best in aggressive progressive online must-see TV at your own peril.